like a lot of music, mostly hip hop, but sometimes it's hard to know if an album I just listened to is good. Well, I know I enjoyed it. How would I rank it amongst other albums I've listened to? And today I want to solve this problem. I have 5 rules for you to compare albums with and actually help you rate them. Also, before we get into this, go ahead and subscribe, as if you like hip hop enough to want to know how to rank your favorite albums, you'll probably like the other content I post. And of course, before we start today, music is subjective, so for full transparency, I'm looking at it from mostly a lyrical side. I'm not really too big into production myself. I'm mostly focused on the lyricism. So hopefully this will help you define what a good album is for yourself. That being said, let's get started with rule number 1. The first, and by far, in my opinion, one of the most important rules to follow is replay value. This is why we don't rate albums off the first listen. Every time you first listen to an album, you're going to love it if you want to love it. If you want to be fair, sit on it for at least a week. Trust me on this. A really good example I can think of an album with very poor replay value is Vultures by Kanye West and thatll. While Vultures had a couple songs that at the time went very hard, no one listens to them today. I will fully admit that my senior year, I remember popping off to Carnival with my CEO class. We'd listen to everywhere we went. But nowadays, I'm more likely to listen to something off of Kanye's pre-2020 catalog than either of the Vultures or Dondas. Now, what makes something have replay value? Well, that depends on your life. And there's different kinds of them. See, there's surface replay value, which is basically, I enjoy the way it sounds. This is most hype songs. Like I said, Carnival, Sicko Mode, any kind of hype song. That's probably like 70% of songs / albums will be because you like how they sound. The next kind I would like to talk about today is emotional. You get an emotional response from the album, or maybe a specific song on the album that makes you feel something. For me, it's always kind of sad stuff. So like Frank Ocean's Blonde, that whole album, right? I can think of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, Mother I Soap. There's also Auntie Diaries on that same album. It's just very sad, raw, emotional. You know, it gets something irked up inside you where you're just like, oh my god. And it doesn't have to be sad. It can be any kind of emotions. Like some songs I'm sure out there make people very happy, and that can be where it gets its replay value. It just depends on what kind of person you are and what appeals to you. Last kind that I want to talk about today is my favorite kind, and that's discovery. It's when you listen to a song 10 plus times and each time you find something new to love about it. My favorite example of this will always be the song Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst by Kendrick Lamar. Because like on the first listen, maybe you notice that he's talking from the perspective of a prostitute on the streets. Then second or third, you'll notice that he's actually also talking from the perspective of his dead homie's brother who just died on the last track. Then maybe on the 4th, 5th, you notice that the prostitute said that Keisha was her sister, like the Keisha from the previous album, section 80. Then a few listens later, oh shit, her vocals are fading out on the back half of her verse right after she says, I'll never fade away, and that represents her dying in the streets. And maybe then after that, you remember the main motif of this first half of the song, and it's promise that you will sing about me when I'm gone. The whole verse is revolving around death near him at such a young age, but you only know that because this is your 10th listen and you finally understand it. And then that's just the first 4 minutes of a 12-minute song. This is, like I said, my favorite form of replay value, as it's by far the most rewarding, though I do kind of understand if you don't enjoy listening to an album 5 times to understand it. But if you aren't willing to do so, maybe you're not the big of a fan of hip-hop as you think you are, you know? This whole rule is by far one of the most important rules, as you don't want recency bias to cloud your opinions. Of course, replay value alone doesn't make an album a classic, so we have to go on to rule number 2. It has to be telling you something or pushing a vision. Now, this rule is more complex than the others because it can be done in different ways. So I'd base your rating on what you like in a song. For example, if you like production evolution, something like Igor, where, you know, in the beginning it's very chaotic, synthy, then as the character finds peace within himself, it becomes more like peaceful kind of beats and stuff. It's very mellowed out. I'd use that. But for our purposes today, I'm going to be looking at the lyrics, as it is the thing I look at the most and I feel the most confident in talking about it today. Again, this is kind of hard to wrap your head around, so I won't fault you for not understanding, as it is something that even I can struggle with, but I'll do my best to explain it here. If an album's a concept album, it's kind of like an easy way to judge it, right? How do you like the story it's telling you, the way it's telling you the story? How do you like, right? Just judge it based off that. But if it's a cohesive project, looking at the lyrics can be a little bit more difficult to find the vision. Here's what I normally do. I look for themes and motifs within the songs. We're going to be comparing two albums and their themes / motifs, as well as whether or not they have a good vision or execute the vision well, right? The first album we're going to be talking about, the bad album, is Iceman, Drake's recent release. If you want an in-depth look, way more in-depth than this video will ever get, on why I think Iceman is bad, you can watch my last video. I talk about the theme of it very heavily in that last video. And then the good example of motifs and themes is going to be Casino by Baby Keem. Now, there's a very specific reason why I chose these two albums, as I feel they both strive to do extremely similar things, just one has a really good execution and one has a very poor execution of it. One of the big things on both of these albums is the artist is trying to tell the listener where they've been the past couple years. For Drake, he mostly talks about he was with money and women, while everyone thought he was off crying and pitying himself. He was actually living with the time of his life, having the time of his life, I mean. For Keem, he was by himself, growing up and realizing he was super unfulfilled with his lifestyle. As well, both albums try and serve as a comeback. For Keem, he does it well. His pen is at an all-time high. Lyrically, he's doing laps on this project. But for Drake, it's definitely lacking, as half the bars on here were in response to beef from years ago, and 98% of the other bars on this album are just kind of boring. You know, there's nothing on this album that made me go, you know what I mean? My final point to this idea is they both try and explain trauma from their lives. Drake, in his very first song on the album, he's talking about how it was tough for him being an only child, and now he's watching his parents grow old, and he has his dad having cancer to deal with. And while it is sad, realistically, it is something that could happen to anyone. It isn't really trauma. Furthermore, my main reason I have a problem with this is he tries to use it as an excuse to be a shitty person on the album. Whereas Baby Keem talks about actual bad things that happened in his life, him seeing his mom being hit by her boyfriend. Later, he sees her on drugs and she walks out on him, leaving his grandma to take care of him, who later has to give Baby Keem the sad news that his mother passed away. And this is just one of 3 songs. You know, there's Highway 95 on about him living on the streets and the horrors he saw of it. There's No Security, where he talks about his insecurity within himself and his skills, as well as his loved ones. Those are just some of the themes. What about motifs? Motifs are like themes, but they're something you hear multiple times throughout an album. An example from these two albums is at the beginning of, I believe, No Security and the end of No Blame, you can hear a casino sound. It's a slot machine either winning or losing, right? As well, Baby Keem uses gambling ideas lyrically throughout the album. He talks about himself gambling with his life when he's living out on the streets. He talks about himself gambling on his career of being a rapper, because hardly anybody makes it rapping, right? Talks about gambling with love, not knowing whether or not a woman actually loves him for himself or loves him for his money. Whereas Iceman doesn't really have any individual motifs. The most almost motif thing is him talking bad about other people. That's not really a motif, as it lyrically does nothing to serve the themes established previously, you know what I mean? Anyways, that's gonna do it for Rule 2. Listen to Casino if you haven't, as it is my album of the year so far. Moving on to Rule 3. Rule number 3 is something I feel like nobody really talks about, and that is identity. An album should have something that when you see this certain thing or hear this certain sound, it makes you think of this album. A lot of artists use some kind of colors or visuals of some kind, and Tyler the Creator is probably the best artist at this I've ever seen. If you see this shade of pink, you're thinking Igor. If you see this green and black, you're thinking Chromacopia. And it isn't just the cover art. Let's look at Tyler the Creator's rollout for Chromacopia. He sent green shipping containers all across the world that read Chromacopia. Then there's also the music videos. Every video from Chromacopia has the same grainy yellow filter on it. Tyler is dressed in a Saint Chroma fit with that militant suit jacket and matching pants, and he's that mask with those deadpan eyes, that inverse mohawk. It's iconic at this point. There was also Igor, his iconic wig with a matching blazer with matching pants. He did both of these costumes at his shows. He's done costumes for Call Me If You Get Lost at shows, and in every music video you'd see with that fucking fluffy hat, this stupid jacket he'd wear, and those shorts. He even has one for his most recent album, Don't Tap the Glass. He's dressed in red leathery, he has glasses, a red hat, and like it's like an 80s style. He has that mustache. The point of all of this is to say that it's very important, whether or not you realize it. But not every album has an identity, but the best ones always do. Think about the best albums you know of. If I see black and white on an album cover, I'm thinking T-Pad. If I see a fucking minivan, I'm thinking GKMC. You know what I mean? Like, all the best ones do. Rule 4. If you want this album to be a 10 out of 10 or a classic, you have to identify whether or not it has skippable songs on it. Just have no skips if you want it to be a 10 out of 10. And what do I mean by this? I mean, it's pretty obvious. There can't be a song on the album you don't like listening to. A good example of a track that's pretty horrendous on an otherwise amazing album is GNX on GNX. A song that I actually don't hate as much as some people, but even I recognize that without this song, the album would be better. Another example I can think of is the Marshall Mathers LP2 with Stronger Than I Was. It really changed the pacing of the album, and it didn't hold up as well as the rest of the songs on it. So that's albums that do have skips. Well, let's look at one that I think is absolutely skipless, Let God Sort 'Em Out. It's an album from the legendary duo Clips, coming back from a 20-year hiatus. They go big on this album. Almost every song is doing similar stuff to back in 2000 with a modern twist on it. As well, since the member Malice has went on a spiritual journey, there's a lot of faith talk and self-contempt from previous actions. All of this makes for an amazing listening experience. You know, you have a drug dealer talking about how he can move keys of coke throughout Virginia without even thinking about it much. And then you have his duo talking about how many lives he's hurt on the same song. And it's brilliant. I love this album so much. There's not a single song that isn't worth listening to, in my opinion. Of course, other people have different opinions and they might think this album has skips, but I believe it does not. Rule number 5, and the final rule for today. How does it affect? Does it make you feel something? As the more personal an album is, the more care went into crafting it. It means more towards you than it might your friend or a guy who you don't know, you know? But don't let this cloud your judgment, as I like Casino a lot. It's my album of the year, as I said previously. And for me, it's a 10 out of 10 because I resonate with it a lot due to having similar experiences to what Kima's had, and in that way, I'm drawn more towards it. But I can recognize that it is a 9 out of 10 because if I didn't care about the subject matter so much, I know that the areas where it lacks would knock it down a number for me. And I can recognize that. And that's why I'll always say Casino's a 9 out of 10. But for me, in my mind, it'll always be a 10 out of 10. So, it was a little bit of a weird video to make. This was definitely more of a commentary type of video than a video essay, obviously. This will definitely be my last time like using gameplay as like background footage. I did it on the Iceman video because I was just like, I kind of want to see where it goes, you know, kind of like whether or not I liked it, basically, because the idea behind it was the gameplay like helps you to distinguish from when I'm talking about music versus when I'm talking about my own, how I feel. And I don't know if it worked or not, to be honest. I'm still thinking whether or not I like it. Right now I'm leaning more towards I don't like it than I do. If I make commentary videos like this again, though, it probably will come back. But we'll see. Maybe I can, like, kind of work it in, kind of change it a little bit, make it actually, like, work how I want it to, instead of just seeming like a commentary video. Because whenever I would pull up the Iceman video, to me it seemed like a commentary video, and I didn't really like that. Instead of a video essay, you know? But I have been having a hard time trying to figure out, like, what do I put for my intro? Because I'm not at a point yet where I want to use my face for this content. So I genuinely don't know. Like, I have a webcam. I could technically, but my webcam isn't very good quality. I need to up it before I would want to do anything, or like stream with a face cam, anything like that. So yeah, I don't know. This video is like, it's just something I kind of wanted to make, because after I watched the Iceman video, I was thinking about it, and I was like, no one really knows what I base it on. And I'd like to have that set. That way, whenever, like, if I continue to make a video like the Iceman video, which I think I will, I think I have an idea for, like, a series I want to start. Then in that situation, you actually know what I'm looking at. That was kind of the goal with this video, as well as to help other people who might be similarly minded to me on how to write a video. Obviously this video won't work for everyone. It's not a one-size-fit-all kind of deal, but anyone who's like kind of like mostly focused on lyricism like I am could maybe use this. So that's why it's gonna upload it. I don't expect this video to do any good at all. Like, if it gets 5 views, that's 5 more than I'd think, because it just like it won't appeal to a lot of people, but I want to have this as kind of a groundwork to kind of build from here, right? So it is kind of just like a, I don't want to say nothing post, because I do think I make good points in this video, with how I judge it, right? And I think it's a good basis to base what you want to judge music off of with. But outside of that, it's not really doing anything. That's why it's so short compared to the last video I made that was like an hour long. But yeah, that's pretty much it. The next video, right? So I brought up the series I want to start doing, and I'm still thinking on it, right? The idea is listening to every album from an artist in one day. So like, the first one that I have written down right now, which would probably be the first one of the series, is Kendrick Lamar, right? Going through from Overly Dedicated all the way up to GNX, right? Which, for Kendrick Lamar, it works because I have a reason for doing it, right? That I'm not going to state because you'll have to watch the video to find out. I have a reason for doing it, and also I'm pretty familiar with Kendrick Lamar's work. Like, I've listened to all of these albums before on their own. But if I turn this into a series, I'll be worried about the fact that I don't know some catalogs as well. So, like, for example, like, Kendrick Lamar and Denzel Curry, I know pretty well. And, like, even Drake and J. Cole, I know pretty well. And Kanye West, I know pretty well. But after that, it's like, it's a little shaky. So if I listen to all of an artist's album in one day, I'd kind of feel like I'm doing a disservice to them by not researching them beforehand. Like, for example, if I listen to every Rick Ross album in one day, I couldn't name you a single Rick Ross album right now. Like, genuinely. But, so, like, I would feel like I'm doing a disservice to him. But also, maybe that plays into, maybe I can play into, like, I've never listened to this artist before. But then where do you go with, like, kind of, like, mediocre rappers, like Juice WRLD, where I've listened to, like, an album of his a couple times. That's it. I guess maybe